Alright, hi guys. So what we're going to do today is talk about the last gasp, really, of the Cold War. We, left off talking about, okay, détente is dead. You've got Reagan in. We mentioned that Reagan, might like nuclear energy, but doesn't like nuclear weapons. But what we're going to see is in the 1980s, you have one final kind of just flash of the Cold War where both sides get almost as close to war as they had in the 1960s. And we see that here I had you watch the Cold War and the Third World doc because a lot of it starts in the Third World. I mean, some of it's going to be the Third World, some of it's going to be Afghanistan. A lot of it just deals with, changes in the Soviet Union, changes in nuclear policy, Reagan's desire to outspend the Soviets in the Cold War. But probably leading the decade will be the Falklands War in 1982. Probably best symbolized by this, the sinking of the General Belgrano. Now, what had happened is the Falklands, off the coast of Argentina, I mean, they had been traditionally British, but the Argentinians, one of the things we really didn't talk about in this course, because this is a U.S. focus, I spend a lot more time on it in my Cold War class, is decolonization. And decolonization is the period when, obviously, decolonization, when Europe decolonizes what we now consider, the second and the third worlds, okay? And the idea is what happens with decolonization is now you have powers, I shouldn't even say powers, nations created out of old colonial and imperial possessions. And so it's the case of, India, say, the British pull out, all right, India, you're your own nation. Or especially, Africa, things like that. But the issue is, these places had, and it starts really in the 40s, the 60s is probably the heyday of decolonization. They're not set up to be decolonized. They're not set up for nationhood. There's a quote, but when we talk about, slavery in the United States, we say that slavery was a poor preparer for freedom. You can't just emancipate the slaves and then leave them to their own devices. Well, that's what we did, and you get the wonderful Reconstruction era, which some people say is probably one of the more disgraceful periods in American history. Well, the fact is, you see something similar in the realm of decolonizations. Congratulations! You're not a part of the empire now. All right, go have fun. Don't get into trouble. Well, clearly, that's not going to work. And so you have the United States and the Soviet Union trying to woo these various powers. And we see just some of the issues, spreading through. And again, we didn't talk a lot about it in this course. But the third world is, largely, like I said on the course posting yesterday, that's when the Cold War really goes hot. Now, the Falklands War is not strictly about decolonization. But it is about, trying to hold on to those old colonial gains. Obviously, the Falklands, Argentina, so we're talking South America. That's nowhere near the United Kingdom. But nonetheless, Britain decides they want to try to hold on to the islands. And so they want to repel this Argentinian invasion. Now, this is a quick 6-week war. The British do win. They take a number of naval-related casualties, however. I mean, probably the most famous, HMS Sheffield being hit by 2 Argentinian Exocet missiles and sinking. And as the ship sank, the crew supposedly sang songs from Monty Python. All right, it's just one of those just weird Britishisms, Speaking of, I have a Monty Python joke. Hopefully you've seen it. Hopefully you're aware of it. When I was in school, it was kind of required literature. I once, years and years ago, when I first started as a TA in graduate school, had 2 students come in. They say, hey, we want to ask you 3 questions about the exam. So I look at them and say, answer me these questions 3, lest the other side ye see. They literally get a deer in the headlights look and say, what? Literally, they had no idea what Monty Python is. So if you don't know what Monty Python is, 1, you should feel bad. In the words of Dr. Zoidberg, that was bad and you should feel bad. Go YouTube it. Go watch something. Educate yourself. You will thank me later. Now, what we see is why we want to talk about the Falklands War in relation to the United States is we are officially neutral. I mean, obviously, Argentina did not attack us. But we have a special relationship with Britain. And so Reagan was going to be like, okay, we will loan the helicopter carrier Iwo Jima to Britain to conclude the war should Britain lose a carrier. And so it's obviously, this has nothing to do with us. This also has nothing to do with communism. Okay? But we need to maintain that alliance with Britain in case the Soviets start doing something, or in case we need that alliance later, say during an invasion of Iraq, whether in 91 or 2003. This is all about keeping those alliances. Another American factor is if you look at General Belgrano, which the General Belgrano was torpedoed and sunk by a HM submarine Conqueror. And, the Conqueror more or less fired 2 World War II vintage torpedoes, struck and blew the bow off the General Belgrano. She sank. And a lot of people were like, well, hey, is this a war crime? Because, again, by the 1980s, our concepts of warfare have changed from what they are in 1941. Okay? But still, there's the issue of war crime. But why the American connection is so advanced is American military capability. And so prolific are American weapons. Because one of the things that we'll see is in the Cold War, when we got new stuff, we pawned our old stuff on to other people. We're like, okay, hey, you need tanks? Here you go. We're using the M60, the M48. We'll give you Shermans. You need ships. We have guided missile stuff, so here's old World War II ships that you don't need. The General Belgrano, okay, this is 1982, 41 years earlier, as the USS Phoenix was one of only a handful of American ships to get underway at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Okay, it's just that kind of, our power is now such that we are supplying arms to a large percentage of the world. So much so that obviously, this is starting to cause problems. And this isn't the only real issue, but you've got, a lot more problems going on. So we start to see, again, the rise of terrorism, which in the 1980s culminates in the 1983 Beirut bombing. Now what happens here is now we begin an era of peacekeeping. This idea, okay, we're going to deploy combat forces around the world just to ensure stability, ensure that, changes in governments go smoothly, that, whatever. Ideally, we're doing it under the aegis of NATO or the UN. But in the case of here, okay, 1982, Marines are sent to Lebanon. And, they're there on duty, peacekeeping. Then October the 23rd, 1983, there's a truck bomb. It blows up the barracks and kills 241 Americans. And then a second truck bomb later kills 58 French. Now, why I want to do this is, what is the thing? The next year, okay, within 6 months, Marines leave Lebanon. So, on the one hand, is it successful? We don't leave immediately, but they're, that may or may not be a good precedent. But why I want to signify this is already by the early 1980s, we are having problems in the Middle East. We're seeing the rise of terrorism, the rise of explosives. Okay, you might not have IEDs, improvised explosive devices, but the pattern for the stuff we're dealing with today is set up by the 1980s. And it's a case of nobody really pays much attention to it then because we're still locked in a Cold War. A Cold War with the Soviet Union. This is going on October the 23rd, 1983. Within 9 days, 10 days, I can do math. There's this thing called Halloween, so there's 31 days in October. Hey, I'm a historian. Doing math is not what I'm paid for. Within 10 days of this attack, the United States will begin a major NATO exercise, Able Archer 83, that is so realistic. it simulates almost full-scale nuclear weapons release, and in the event almost triggers a world war. So, of course, we're not going to pay that much attention to Beirut, but the issues are already there. What we're more concerned with are things like Grenada. Now, Grenada, what happens here, again, decolonization, gets independence from the United Kingdom. 1983, you see the People's Revolutionary Government undertake a coup. So now Grenada is marginally communist. And this is in the Caribbean. I said Grenada, it should be Grenada, whatever. Grenada sounds like a bad hand grenade. Now, the issue for us, why we care, is there's a large airport under the island. And here with Grenada, we can see the United States in Operation Urgent Fury, which again, this is October 25. This is 2 days after the Beirut bombing. Again, you can see where our concerns are. We're not focused on the problems of the Middle East. We're focused on the still problems of communism and containment. Okay? Communism has now spread to the Caribbean. Well, it was already there, yay Castro, but it's now spread. And so worried are we that because they're building this airport, we fear militarization. Theoretically, this airport would be big enough to support Soviet Tupolev bombers, that we launch an invasion of a place that we have no justification to be. We don't build a coalition. We don't go, to the UN. We just do it. Now, the thing is, this communist airport for the usage of Soviet bombers was designed by Canadians and proposed by the British in the early 70s when Grenada was still British territory. This has nothing to do with communism. This has nothing to do with Soviet bombers. This has nothing to do even with militarization. This is purely commercial. If we build a huge airport, maybe we can get more tourists in, and we can get people doing stuff, money into the economy. But by 83, we are so panicked about the Cold War, okay, that never mind rationalization, never mind what our allies say. I mean, the United Nations, the Soviet Union, even Britain, even our allies, whom we had just helped in the Falklands War, condemn us for this. We screwed up. But was it worth it? Well, for us, communism stops here in the form of really bad cardboard signs. Why this is important? I mean, this is a quick operation, very few casualties, and it's going to be celebrated in the United States at the time. Why this is important is it shows that the American policy of détente is now over. The American policy of arms reduction is now over. The American policy of easing relations is now over. Now we are taking a hardline stance against communism. How dare communism come in the Caribbean? How dare it want to get a suntan? How dare it build an airport? And so we see in 1983 almost a complete, how best to put it, reawakening of the old 1940s ideas of containment and stopping the domino theory. Okay, we oust this communist government on a small Caribbean island simply because they were building an airport. We're hardliners now. But along with that comes again the fear of nuclear weapons. Reagan was terrified of them. Okay, I realized my next slide, because I can see it here, I screwed it up, so we'll deal with it. Reagan is terrified of nuclear weapons. Okay, as early as December 1945, then as an actor. Okay, 40 years before the events we're talking about, Reagan wanted to lead an anti-nuclear rally. Yes, people protested in the 40s. Yes, they gathered in the streets, blocked freeways. They got their message out. Reagan was worried even then that, what is a world with nuclear arms? What is a world where, beep, you push a button and you can vaporize a city? American nuclear policy, since the 60s, had been mutually assured destruction. Remember, you fire your missiles, then I'll fire my missiles, and so we both die. So, don't fire your missiles. But, he knew, and it go back to that 1963 Saturday Evening Post with 108 million people killed. Well, now the numbers are up to 150 because population keeps just skyrocketing. And so Reagan wanted a world, and he literally says this, free of nuclear arms. He realized that nukes could lead to war, that deterrence, this whole eyeball to eyeball game, where you stare, I stare you in the face, you stare me, you stare me in the face, and whoever blinks. I don't want you to do something, well, I just heard something fall over. I don't want you to do something, so I'm going to threaten you with nuclear weapons. Hopefully you'll back down. There's also the issue that MAD doesn't deal with. MAD assumes a bipolar world. Well, now you have China, so now this tripolar concept, it doesn't fully, it doesn't fully work then. But now, what happens, and here's where we can see the issues of places like North Korea. What happens if you get a small little country with nukes, or you get a terrorist organization with nukes? Deterrence doesn't stop them. In the era of suicide bombers, deterrence doesn't stop. MAD doesn't work. So, for Reagan, the best idea was nobody have nuclear weapons. Alright, sorry for the pause. I decided to go ahead and fix the slide real quick. But a world free from nuclear weapons. I mean, it was probably the safest thing. And, we can also see, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. If somebody wants to, raise the stakes, then the other guy has to raise the stakes. And then you're back to this. Well, then somebody's got to raise again, and then again, and then again. And it just, where does it end? And we see the 1980s. And I posted a whole slew of videos. We see with the 1980s, again, that last gasp, where the Cold War almost goes fully hot. And it's a very dangerous thing. We see, in 1983, let's collectively call it the 1983 war scare. Because we're going to see a timeline of events that things are just going to start spiraling out of control. In March, I believe it's March, Ronald Reagan had a speech, which I posted, where he calls the Soviet Union the evil empire. Remember, we are now hardline communist, or anti-communist. So, Reagan's wanting to challenge the Soviet Union. Part of his stuff is if we can outspend the Soviet Union, we can crumple it. Then September 1, okay, you have this. The shoot down of Korean Airlines 007. Now, what happens here is a Korean Airlines flying from Anchorage over Japan and then to Seoul, South Korea. But it takes a more direct path. It flies off course. It overflies Sakhalin Island. Well, remember, Cold War, we're worried about nuclear stuff. Okay, if you've ever seen the movie Failsafe, this is a really good indicator. Soviets pick up this plane. Now remember, an airliner is as big as a bomber. We don't really have, it's hard to identify. Transponders could be malfunctioning, whatever. So the plane comes on in. The Soviets, try to challenge it, but for whatever reason, it doesn't respond. So the Soviets scramble Su-15 Sukhoi fighters, and they shoot down the airliner. I posted a video of Reagan's speech where he calls it the Korean Airlines Massacre. If you listen to the speech, it almost sounds like we're about to go on a war footing. How the hell could the Soviets do this? So now we get really, really angsty. Okay, we're hardline anti-communist. The Soviets have just shot down this airliner. Then, a few weeks later, September the 29th, a Soviet missile satellite, or anti-missile satellite, screws up, September the 26th. And what we see is with the satellite, what it's done, the Oko satellite, it's in a large elliptic orbit of Earth. And the idea is it can look on Earth, and theoretically through the limb of the atmosphere, you could see the missiles. So it's an early warning thing. And the whole idea is, okay, scan the Earth, scan the United States, and be able to detect a missile launch. September 26th. So now, 3 weeks, a little more than 3 weeks after, Reagan's speech, which almost sounds like a declaration of war. I mean, listen to the speech. It sounds like, and again, when I post videos, I assume you're watching them. Listen to the speech. It sounds like a declaration of war. The satellite flashes on the alarm boards. Massive nuclear strike launched from the United States. The Soviets bring their forces to standby. This is what they have been training for. This is what they've been prepping for. This is what everything since 1945 has told them. And then one guy, the missile commander, Stanislav Petrov, refuses to launch. He says it makes no sense for the United States to launch. It literally makes no sense. Why would they do it? Well, they just threatened war over the Korean Air shoot-down. Yeah, but that was 25 days ago. Why would they shoot now? So he says, I refuse to fire until the satellite makes either another orbit or we have other confirmation. They order him to fire. Moscow orders him to fire, but he refuses. Eventually, the confirmation comes in. The United States did not release nuclear weapons. And so the Soviets stand down. And the guy is fired and criticized. Why? Simply this. What if it had been a legit attack? If it had been, his waiting would have denied the Soviets a retaliatory response. And so, again, this is both why you want human beings instead of machines with their fingers on the button, but also why you would want human beings instead of human machines. So, okay, September. Then we get, to October. And, you have more events building up. Those tensions increase. October 83, you've got, Grenada. You have Beirut. Okay? Then November the 2nd, the United States begins Operation Able Archer 83. Able Archer was a large NATO exercise. And what happens is, you have ground forces and naval, stuff from all over Europe exercising. And it simulates full-scale nuclear release. Well, the Soviets have their spies. The Soviets, since 1981, had a project, Operation Ryan. R-Y-A-N, but it's probably not pronounced Ryan, but you never know. They're spying on us, duh. They see this. They see this operation, this exercise going down. Well, we tell them that, okay, this is, just an act. But come on, watch the videos coming out here. The threats of war, the hardline stance, the satellite goofing up. The Soviets then go on full alert until the exercise stands down November 11th. Then they come off full alert. And now it seems like the Soviets are the jumpy ones here, right? November 20, 1983. So now 9 days after Able Archer is the worldwide TV premiere, and I say worldwide TV, it's probably in the United States only, of a movie called The Day After, which for me as a child was one of the scariest movies I had ever seen. I'm actually going to pause this and adjust the lighting. Okay, let's adjust some lighting there. There we go. And I posted the attack scene from it. The premise of the movie is this. The Soviets, for whatever reason, are launching nuclear weapons at the United States. Okay? And then now, how do people in just rural Kansas deal with it? How do you deal with the fact, okay, you have 15 to 30 minutes, maybe an hour, before your world goes up in flames? How do you deal with, okay, the missiles are coming, you fire your missiles. Now, how do you survive the unsurvivable? It's, at the time, this was a very scary movie. Again, it scared the hell out of me as a kid, because it was kind of realistic. But why I mention it is it shows movies are reflective of the culture that created them. They're reflective of what we think of, how we think. Okay? This movie is a throwback to the 1960s nuclear disaster movies. It is, never mind movies like Marooned. Never mind movies like, Meteor, which shows, U.S. and Soviet Union cooperating to blow up asteroids and meteors about to impact Earth. Now we're back to we're afraid of nuclear warfare. We're afraid of missile strikes coming at any time. The giant strode light, little Timmy, duck and cover, it's a bomb. We're as amped up in 1983 as we had been in 1962. Okay. So what we're going to see is, how do we combat this? What do we do? And so Reagan goes full on, okay, we're going to militarize the United States, and we're going to do what we can to end the Cold War. Reagan wants a larger Navy. He wants new bombers. He wants newer and more missiles. The defense budget swells to $500 billion in 1985. Whereas, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had begun a missile drawdown in Europe. Now, Reagan, we're going to put 572 missiles back in. We're directly challenging Moscow. We're going to almost risk war to see who will blink. And so because of this, you get a flurry of proxy wars. Reagan's whole idea is this: heat up the Cold War. Spend the Soviets into the ground. Make them give up. Make the Cold War end. And he's also worried at the same time, how do we protect the United States? And so one of the issues with deterrence is, if my missiles can get through, then you can no longer deter me. If your missiles can get through, I can no longer deter you. So the issue it's kind of paradoxical, but with regards to nuclear weapons, the more you want to protect your country, the more you may endanger it. And so we get the Satellite Defense Initiative, better known thanks to a subpar movie that's, inferior to Star Trek at the time, Star Wars. Sorry, I'm really excited for Beyond, and sorry, not sorry. What is Star Wars? Star Wars is the Reagan-era plan to have a bunch of satellites in space to coordinate the shooting down of ballistic missiles. You would either be able to destroy incoming missiles with stuff from the ground, so, anti-ballistic missiles, or you might explode nuclear warheads that might detonate other incoming nuclear warheads, or have ground and satellite-based lasers and tracking and reflector platforms in space, so that, much like Dr. Evil, you can zap ballistic missiles with lasers. This was true space-age technology. Again, lasers, how common were lasers at this point? It's nothing like what we have now. But lasers had started to stop losing their sci-fi ability and start to be something we actually seriously toyed with. So what is SDI? Okay. Eventually this is not really going to be adopted. Okay. But the idea is, okay, we need to protect the United States. We need to make sure that if the Soviets do launch, a la, the day after, we can stop the missiles. It's a question, how do you... Reagan realized the best way is to not have missiles at all, but if we have to have missiles, we have to protect. Now, this is not adopted. It's too expensive. The technology just isn't there. Again, using ground-based and ship-launched missiles, we still are struggling with this. We still don't have laser beams in space, right? There's also the issue, why this isn't adopted, even though we didn't ratify SALT II, we're still living by its provisions because we don't want to tick off the Soviets. Because this triggers a war scare for the Soviets. If we can shoot down Soviet missiles, okay, then we could launch our missiles, their missiles get shot down, and our missiles obliterate Russia. MAD has created a balance of power since the 60s. Yes, the Soviets have more nukes. Yes, they have bigger nukes. But we still had enough to challenge that they could not launch without being destroyed themselves. First strike weapons, such as submarines, guaranteed there was no way to destroy all of the missiles in a sneak attack. Okay? Anti-ballistic missiles were the only possible solution, but they so changed the balance of power, their very adoption risks war. So we decided, okay, we're not going to do it. At least not till the George W. Bush administration. Now, one of the things is we're doing this, we don't understand. The Soviets are politically fragile. Okay, the Soviet political system doesn't work. Again, communism is corrupt. Where the hell have you been the last 50 years? I mean, this is, to us as Americans, well, duh. But at the time, we see what's going on. And so a lot of times the Soviets are overreacting because of internal politics, not because they want to blow up the world. We have war scares, but now it's starting to be less and less, okay, the Soviets want to do it, than more an accident, something happens, or, whatever. Now we start to abandon the line of the Soviets are just going to, blow us up for the hell of it. Now, as all this is going on, we do see the, Soviet war in Afghanistan churning on throughout the decade. If you've ever watched Charles Wilson's War, okay, we are actively supplying the Mujahideen, okay? We're actively supplying the Afghan rebels. We give money, equipment, aid, okay? If you're a firearms collector, as I am, the Lee Enfield rifle becomes somewhat scarce during this time in the United States because Afghanistan had been, an old British colony. They had a bunch of Lee Enfields, 303 caliber cartridges. So we organized to send what we can, in the United States that brought over as collector's items overseas. Okay. Our hope, for better or for worse, because remember, we're not focused on the here. We're not focused on what happens in 20 years. We're focused on the here and now. We wanted to make it a Vietnam. Okay. We wanted to do to the Soviets what the Soviets and Chinese had done to us in the 60s. But we overlook what happens when warfare destroys the liberal Islamic State. What happens when the forward-looking, westernized government collapses? What happens when you train various, very extremely pious Muslims how to fight a guerrilla war, and then, you give them all the equipment they need, specifically things such as Stinger missiles to shoot down helicopters, because the Soviets really rely on the Mi-28 Hind for, day-to-day operations. What happens when you take that, and then once the Cold War is over, you say, okay, sorry, we want the weapons back, but we're not going to help you rebuild the country. Colonization doesn't look to the future. The Cold War did not look to the future. And so what all this means is, what does it mean? It means that we're setting up problems. We're creating a power vacuum where groups like the Taliban movement can take power, where those uber right-wing religious Islamic societies can take over, and never mind Western liberalism. Now it can be religious theocracies. And, why do they hate us? Because, again, Cold War, we start getting more and more involved in world affairs. Hopefully one of the things you've gleaned from this course is we're dabbling in everything between, okay, here's arms, here's the Marshall Plan, to, hey, here's grain exports to the Soviet Union, here's stuff in the Middle East, tanks for Israel, okay? We're dabbling in everything, and it's a rejection of traditional American virtues, but also now it has the side benefit of if people don't like what's going on in their country, we've created the perfect scapegoat. And in some cases we are possibly responsible. We can also see this Cold War heating up with the Iran-Iraq war. And what this is, it's an 8-year-long war going on more or less the exact same time. Iran and Iraq had numerous border disputes. And we see that, Iraq And here's what's really screwed up about this war. We had initially backed Iran, but remember the Iranian Revolution. Now the Soviets back Iran. So then the Soviets had traditionally backed Iraq, but now they see that Iraq could be useful to check Iran, but so now we back Iraq. I mean, and that's really the heart of Cold War geopolitics. It's not ideology on the part of, the unaligned nations. It's simply, we will use whoever. So, okay, we're going to use Iran. Or we can't use Iran anymore, we'll use Iraq. The Soviets use Iraq. Well, we need that for something else. We're not going to use that anymore. We'll use Iran. It all changes. Now, for an American history course, I don't want to spend too much time on the Iran-Iraq war, but a couple of things that I do want to touch on. One, we need to talk about the Vincennes incident. But two, we need to talk about chemical warfare. And this is what's going to lay the foundations for the belief of the large chemical program that is in large part used to justify the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Specifically, why do we think that, they have, chemical and biological weapons? If you look, the war is so bloody that beyond chemical warfare, the Iranians would form suicide brigades and literally just have, entire formations of troops charge into enemy fire, knowingly committing suicide just to try to take a position. This is a particularly bloody war. And so if we look, of all Iranian casualties in the war, 5% are due to chemical stuff. If you look, nerve gas alone will kill 20,000. Another 80,000 will be injured by the use of nerve gas. To put a human face on it, this is the town of Halabja, a Kurdish town here on the right, and it will be hit by gas, by the Iraqi forces, and it will kill 5,000 people. To map out what this looks like, this is how, neither side makes really lengthy advances, but you can see just the sheer number of Iraqi chemical attacks, and many of them even on Iraqi soil. This is a bloody, gruesome conflict. And another reason why this is important for American history is Iraq gets a lot of money for it from Kuwait. Well, after the war, after both sides are devastated, Kuwait still, wants those loans repaid. And Saddam Hussein says, well, I don't have the money. So in true gangster fashion, you can't pay the bank back? Rob the bank. That's what he does. Take over Kuwait, I don't have to repay Kuwait anymore. It's kind of crazy, but that's what happens. But this war goes on and on and on. It's a huge bloodletting. So we, of course, deploy forces to monitor. In 1984, we agree to an arms embargo to both sides. We say, okay, we're not going to sell weapons to either side. But this is after we've supplied a fair amount of weapons to both sides. The damage had already been done. Then May 17, 1987, the frigate USS Stark re-attacked by Iranian fighters and crippled. The next year, April 14, 1988, the USS Samuel B. Roberts, another frigate, will be hit by an Iranian mine. So yeah, and we will a limited response. We're going to hit Iranian oil platforms. We're going to hit Iranian ships. Just as a, hey, if you guys want to fight, great. Keep it to yourselves. But the worst tragedy, July the 3rd, 1988. The cruiser USS Vincennes shoots down Iranian Air Flight 655. The Iranian Air Flight leaves. Well, the Iranians, to try to save money, and this was a story told to me by a former student who was familiar with the subject, what they would do is they would rip transponders out of old aircraft and put them in to save money. Don't build new transponders. So this thing is giving off the transponder signal of a bomber. It's an airliner, so it's a pretty, beefy target. And so it's flying towards the American fleet. And so the cruiser takes on its own initiative, fires a missile, hits the plane, 280 innocent civilians killed. So why I mention that is it takes us the longest time to acknowledge it. We continually, we say, the cruiser did what it had to do. If you listen to the speeches at the time, I don't think I posted one, but I'll try to see if I can find one. But why it's important is, and some things that we mentioned that I've held a discussion in my Cold War class. 1988, we shoot down an airliner, and we try to play it off. But yet, 1983, the Soviets shoot down an airliner, and we raise holy hell. Okay. So why do we think that is? Well, I've had some students go for the obvious, that because this is Iranian, that, this was not a way to score political points. But the other issue could be the fact that it's 1988. The Cold War is winding down. We're 1 year off from what we'll call the revolutions of 1989. And I realize that I'm apparently not able to shut up today, so might have to break this lecture up. We'll see. But we're only a year off. The Cold War is winding down. But in either case, this also shows, why is there distrust between the United States and Iran even to this day? Things like this. Okay. I don't know. I don't know if we've ever paid reparations. I know when I taught this class a couple of years ago we hadn't. I don't know if that's changed or not. But suffice it to say, there's, history dictates where we are. History helps shape what's going on. And so if you want to know, again, why do we distrust Iranian desires for, nuclear enrichment? Why do they distrust us? Simple. Things like this. So at the same time as we're losing trust with the unaligned nations, Reagan and the new Soviet Premier, Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, in 1985, begin a partnership that will lead not only to the end of the Cold War, but also, such that at Reagan's funeral in 2004, Gorbachev will attend. Now, the 1985 Geneva Summit, it's inconclusive. We're hardliners. They don't want to back down on human rights issues. They don't want to back down on Afghanistan. We don't want to back down on the Satellite Defense Initiative. But why this is important is we say, okay, well, we can't break through now. But let's have more stuff. Let's have more meetings. Let's meet again in 86. Let's meet again in 87. Let's, go back to the eras of détente. Or at least let's try to make sure we don't blow each other up. And so the two guys meet, and this creates a partnership that I firmly believe is largely responsible for the end of the Cold War. I once had a professor when I was an undergraduate say that Mikhail Gorbachev here on the right was the greatest reformer of the 20th century. I don't know if I will go that far, but I'll say this. Without him, okay, the Cold War could go on without Reagan. Or, the Cold War would have ended without Reagan. But the Cold War would not have ended when it did without Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, one thing that I do want to mention as we break away from the Cold War is part of the aspects of the budget cuts, Reagan, the Reagan recession, the various, trickle-down economics, as well as inflated spending, is that on October 19, 1987, okay, what is that? 58 years to the month since the last time the stock market crashes. The Dow falls 22%. Billions are going to be lost, on Wall Street. This is a major economic hurdle. Literally, the economy overnight tanks. Now, what is different is much the same. It affects the United States, then spreads to the world. But what is different is the market will rally. Okay? Why does this happen? Because we're doing stuff in Iran. Again, we're hitting oil sites in retaliation for, the attack on the Stark. Well, guess what? It's an economy run by oil. We're bombing oil sites. Whoop, dip in the market. Oh, politics, what Reagan's policies are doing. Politics and stock markets are tied. That's why what you should do is, listen to a political speech. If, a politician says something great, the next day the stocks are going to rise up. If the president says, okay, we're going to have troubled times ahead, the stocks come down. That's just how it works. Politics and the market are tied, which is why when you vote, have the economy in mind. Now, the market does rally pretty quickly. This doesn't trigger a depression. I don't even think this triggers a recession. So it shows that the market is volatile, the market is tied to politics, but the American economy in 1987 was much stronger than it had been in 1929. In 1929, the market crashes, and and then it just nosedives to the point, one of the photos I love to show, my History 1103, it's a billboard. It's got a family driving car, and it says, America, the greatest standard of living in the world, while out in front of it is a line for a soup kitchen. Oops, not that great a standard of living. So the United States, we're still trucking along. Trying to force an end to the Cold War does have political ramifications, but the economy can handle it. Unlike, the economy is much, 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 much stronger. And so then we get, again, we come back to Mikhail Gorbachev, who, ever since I was a kid, every time I see his picture, one of the big things you should notice is the giant, birthmark. Well, I'm a fan of the Naked Gun movies. How much? I even own the series. Yes, there was actually a TV series, Police Squad, that's based off of. But and I think it's the first one, yeah. You see Leslie Nielsen, punch Gorbachev, take a rag, wipe off the birthmark, and go, aha, I knew it. But one clip from the original Naked Gun movie is actually true. Because you have Gorbachev meeting, all these people, like, death to America, blah, blah, blah. We're already aware of, death to America. We're already aware of, the feelings towards us. But what gets me is Gorbachev, the character, says, I am more well-liked than even their president. Gorbachev was pretty well-liked. Because Gorbachev was not a hardline communist. Gorbachev wanted to help his people. He wants to help Russia and by extension the Soviet Union, but he wasn't tied to the hardline communist ideals. We're far enough away from the people of, who had, created the revolution, who knew Stalin, who had worked under Stalin and Lenin, that it's okay to adopt two policies, so critical. They're Russian policies, but we're going to talk about them in an American history class. Glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. The heart of Gorbachev's ideals, and he comes into power as General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985, then he will be the overall leader of the party in 1988. His whole idea was to reform the Soviet Union. He realized that it couldn't keep going on the way it was. Openness, glasnost, less censorship, more political participation. Let other parties other than the Communist Party have a say in what's going on. Now, the Communist Party would still get the lion's share of votes, the lion's share of the say, but they would open it up. Then you get perestroika, a restructuring. End the state-sponsored monopolies. Bring back at least semi-private businesses. Okay, you can run your own business, but you still have to report to the state. Let's start trying to make money. Let's stop ruling by fear. But the issue is the communist system, again, it's so corrupt. All right, when you build it on the backs of, if you know what a Russian heart attack is, a Russian heart attack is an ice pick through the head. Leon Trotsky, was assassinated in 1940. He had helped Lenin, he had helped Stalin, bring everything into power. And then, he and Stalin had a falling out, so Trotsky was exiled. And Stalin sent assassins to kill him, ice pick through the head, and the Soviet state media said, oh, he just had a heart attack. Yeah, I don't think aspirin's going to help that kind of heart attack. I'm just saying. Where is it going with this? You can't have a system built on that kind of repression. Okay? There's a song there's a song on YouTube I'm gonna post. It's called "The History of the Soviet Union," arranged to the theme of Tetris. And it's stupid good, it's an earworm, but it makes the point. You attack Stalin. You say anything bad about Stalin, you're off to a gulag. You are off to a hard labor camp in Siberia. A place crappier in the winter than Oklahoma. The air really does burn your face there. You cannot take that kind of system where political enemies can just be disposed of. Where, you don't want to collectivize your farms? We will starve you out, such as the starving of the kulaks. You can't do that and restructure it. So eventually, these reforms are going to bring down the entire political system. The Soviet Union is going to collapse, not less from what Reagan does, and more from what Gorbachev does on the inside. Reagan helps. What the United States and Britain are doing are great, but the Soviet Union is mostly destroyed by its lack of modernization ability. Now, by that time, by 1987, we start to see a slowing of the Cold War. The Soviets just can't keep up. Again, more economics. What we need? What is it? What is it supposedly? Dr. Strangelove. It's an old 1963 movie. It's really great. Deals with, what if somebody goes crazy and wants to nuke the world? And so an ambassador. Well, our people wanted more nylons and washing machines. We're having to build nuclear weapons. The arms race, the peace race, the space race. We can't compete in so many races. Well, that's kind of true. So the Soviets just can't keep up. So we start getting the first real sign of slowing with the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And what this is, the INF, which is signed here in 1987, which Gorbachev is being serious and Reagan's like, haha, I just remembered a joke. That or he farted and it tickles. Whatever. Anyways, is why this is important. Both sides agree to remove missiles from Europe. Remember how we just put 572 in? We're not only taking them out, we're taking all of the rest out. To the tune of both sides together, removing 2,600 missiles. Now, these are not strategic weapons. These aren't the stuff that's going to, fly to Moscow or the United States. But these are more the tactical nuclear missiles. The intermediate range. This is the stuff that, okay, we're still going to be able to nuke you, but we're removing that stuff that's really in your face. So tensions start to ease. Then April 1988, the Soviets under Gorbachev announced that they will begin a phased withdrawal from Afghanistan. They've not been able to secure the country. They've not been able to stop the Mujahideen. More and more Soviets are dying, so they say, okay, we know when we need to leave our Vietnam. And they begin in 88, and it will be done by 89. So there's the hope that the Cold War's end is actually in sight. We're getting to a point, we're removing missiles. 87, we've got now 3 meetings between Reagan and Gorbachev. And Reagan appears to be the hero because he knows how to work the television. He knows how to craft an image. Again, Gorbachev is the real hero, but Reagan gets the credit. And then 1989. If you didn't know the Cold War was going to end before, you knew it was going to end this year. Because history repeated itself. 151 years earlier, you get the revolutions of 1848. And these are nationalistic revolutions that hit every major continental European country. And the idea is simply this. They're nationalism. We don't want a king or a queen or a monarch. We want us. We want Poles taking charge of Poland. If we're, if we're Czechoslovakian or Polish in somebody else's country, we want our own country. We want to be Czechoslovakians, not Austro-Hungarians. We want to be Poles, not part of Prussia. And so, 1848, they rise up. Well, we see the same thing. In Poland, you get the Solidarity movement. We want to be Poles. We want to be Poles for Poles, not as part of the Warsaw Pact, not as part of a larger collective. We want Poles to stand up in solidarity and be our own nation. And then it sweeps Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania. And remember, okay, this is nominally independence. They more or less throw out the Soviet overlords. The Soviets agree to withdraw. Now, remember 1968, the Brezhnev Doctrine. Okay, Gorbachev could have mobilized the army, went in, and no, you guys are staying in the Warsaw Pact. Gorbachev lets them go. Gorbachev says, go. Only in Romania is there violence. In Romania, it's because their dictator, Ceausescu, was, I mean, he was an a-hole, and the people didn't like it, and they took it out on him. But everyone else freely left, mostly without violence, and formed democratic governments. If the Soviet Union is not going to stomp here, okay, if the Soviets are not going to let this go, then how are the Soviets big and bad? How is this such a threat? But more than that, if Gorbachev hoped to do this, meaning like, okay, just let out the troublemakers, it completely backfires. Because more and more people want it. And then we tap into probably the oldest thing we have. 1961, to ease tensions over Berlin, the Soviets begin building the Berlin Wall and isolate East and West Berlin. 1962, you have John F. Kennedy. Ich bin ein Berliner. I am a jelly donut. No, sorry, I am... Actually, a Berliner was a type of jelly donut, but Ich bin ein Berliner means, I am a citizen of Berlin. That's what he was going for. Ich bin ein Berliner. Where is Marilyn Monroe? Omea Quimby. Then 1987. And I posted the speech. Go ahead and watch it. Ronald Reagan. Mr. Gorbachev. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The Berlin Wall, by 1987, had been a symbol of the Cold War, of the division between East and West. The symbolic epitome of, remember, the Iron Curtain speech that Churchill gave back in the 40s at Westminster College. Then November 8th, some border guards let some people through. There's a video. It's in German, but it's subtitled. I posted. I'd like you to watch it. I've got it. German border guards, something like that. The East German Republic, if you can call it that, the People's Republic of Germany. Again, if they have to tell you it's a People's Republic, it's not a People's Republic. Wanted to start sponsoring a work visa. And more or less, they said, okay, anybody that has something like this can go apply for one, and then you can go. But the guy on a televised thing didn't say work visa. He just said anyone with a visa. And then someone said, oh, well, when are you going to do this? They weren't supposed to take effect until the next day. He said, well, as far as I know, it's already in effect. So people start mobbing at the border things. People start trying to get through. If you want to understand the confused, puzzled look on the border guards in that video, it's because had this person scaled the wall that morning, they'd have whipped down their AK-74 and just shot him off the wall. Now, they're clamoring here. There's about 40 times as many people wanting to go to West Berlin as border guards. What do you do? And somebody says, let them go. We'll mark the troublemakers. We won't let them back into East Germany. That'll show them. How dare you escape communism? We're not letting you back in. Well, most weren't wanting to flee to the West. They were just wanting to go to West Berlin. See, when the Berlin Wall went up, the Soviets did it overnight. And so, literally, there were families separated by the wall that could not get through. Okay, if you had lived in the eastern part of Germany but you worked in the West, if you had to stay late that night or whatever, you're stuck in the West. Or if you're in Western Berlin and you had just gone to East, well, sorry, you're stuck in East Berlin now. So this is people rejoining. And the crowds become more and more and more. And then finally, The next day, November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall begins to come down. The Soviets do not do anything. They do not invoke the Brezhnev Doctrine. They do not clamp down. Because Gorbachev realizes the Soviet Union is not capable of doing so at this point, as well as if the people want it. I mean, you've been ruling by fear and oppression. Where has that gotten you? And so we see that by 1990, Soviet control of Eastern Europe has collapsed. In Germany, you get the peaceful revolution of 1989. Almost overnight, they become liberalized. Now, the economies don't really match up. Even today, Eastern Germany is significantly poorer than Western Germany. But it's enough that in 1990, within a year, East and West Germany unify, and Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, is born. The capital moves from Bonn. Literally, when I was not your age, but when I was a kid, we learned in school, the capital of Germany is Bonn. Okay? It goes back to being Berlin. Berlin, once again, becomes the capital of Germany. So now, where does that leave the United States as we wrap this up, as I realize, once again, gone a little over time? It leaves it like this. The Cold War is almost over. Anybody can see it. The war scare of 1983 is not going to happen in 1990. Everything we've been saying, the evil empire speech, the Soviet domination, that's gone now. And so it appears that Reagan is the hero. The Cold War is not going to end until the presidency of George H.W. Bush. We're still dealing with the after effects of the Cold War even now. But we see that Reagan achieves a myth-like status within the modern Republican Party. I'm not following the RNC, but I would be willing to bet that Reagan's getting name-dropped several times. But the fact is that myth may not actually be true. He creates the idea of trickle-down economics. We need to lower taxes. Well, that was a Democrat initiative from Kennedy. We see that, with Reagan, we have the idea of small government. Remember what he says, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. Those are the scariest words in the English language. But after the 1982 recession, he bloats out the government because you cannot trim government spending that much. The national debt increases from $700 billion to $3 trillion. All those people, that you might be like, well, the debt under Obama, you guys would have had a field day under Reagan. Reagan has this myth of being pro-business, but yet he raises corporate business taxes. We need more money. We have this idea that he wins the Cold War. But what actually wins the Cold War is the fact you have the indigenous peoples of Eastern Europe rising up, wanting to take their countries back, and Mikhail Gorbachev declining to use force like his predecessors. Reagan plays a part. I'm not going to take that away from him. But the Cold War cannot be looked at simply from an American perspective. We have to look at it from, at the very, very, very least, a bipolar perspective, but more realistically, a global perspective. And so the Cold War wraps up. I mean, when do we want to mark the end of the Cold War? December 25, 1991. Christmas Day, 1991, the Soviet Union ceases to exist. But the Cold War, by 1989, 1990, it's obvious it's done. The Soviet Union, no longer the big bad guys. No longer are we planning for, a rain of nuclear bombs. Those duck and cover videos, what they're being done? Strategically edited to be tornado videos from school. Look out, Timmy, it's a tornado, duck and cover. The Cold War is all but over. But you and I are still dealing with its after effects, and odds are we will be doing so for a long time to come. And on that note, that's going to wrap it up for today. Before you stop, thought I would talk a little bit about the extra credit. What I would like you to do for your extra credit paper is pick a couple of events, say up to 3, that are going on today. And they can be things like, police brutality, racism, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Republican National Convention, whatever. And I want you in 3 pages, and this is, all 3 events will be in this 3 pages, not 3 pages per event. Look back through the course. Use your notes, use your textbooks, use Turabian footnotes, and talk about how far as a society we've come. Conversely, talk about how far as a society we still have to go. Talk about, how you can see, what's going on today in the past. How can you see it in American history, in the period we're covering? And pretty much, can you see progress? Can you see change? Can you see things, just not moving? How do you see it? How can you see the evolution of whatever? Or how can you see historical influences on whatever? It's open-ended, but it's just what I'd like you to do, tie what you've learned in this course with what's going on today. It's not to be that detailed. It's not to be, this isn't supposed to be hard. This is just something that you can do for up to, I believe I said 30 points of extra credit. There's not really a rubric. I'm just going to grade it based on how much work you put into it. You will need to upload it to Dropbox, and I'm going to have the due date be the Sunday of finals week. So what would that be if the course ends 29th? July 31. Okay, that's when you'll need to have it uploaded by. You don't have to do it, but it's something I think might be eye-opening. Some of you might like it, but again, it's worth 30 points. So if you need some extra credit, you didn't do so hot on an exam or a review, feel free to do it. Along with that, remember that your final book review or your movie review, if you chose to do that option, are due Monday the 25th. If you're missing something, you need some help with whatever, let me know. And other than that, I think that's all I've got for you, so I will catch you guys in the next video. All right, bye-bye.